Good evening and thanks for staying tuned. Welcome to our COVID-19 update. I am Ladi Akiridoluale. Here are the highlights at this hour. Confusion for the status of essential service workers, including journalists, as police and presidential task force issue different definitions on movement during curfew. Interior Affairs Minister confirms visiting Chinese medical team are still in the country due to airspace closure. And prospective vaccine shows promise as 1.5 million people are now confirmed to have COVID-19 in the United States. Henceforth, there shall be no human or vehicular movement across Lagos State from 8 p.m. to 6 a.m. According to the police, this curfew forms part of the latest phase of the ease on lockdown directives by the police hierarchy. Speaking on the directive, the Lagos State Commissioner of Police, Mr. Akeem Odumosu, explains that the enforcement of the curfew is inclusive of all categories of essential workers.
The enforcement of COVID-19 restrictions. This thing is real. We have restrictions that people must move on the streets with the mask on. Moving without mask on the streets in Nigeria now is an offense, punishable under the law. Moving and crowding without maintaining social distance is an offense in the public. And more importantly, we have curfew in Nigeria. Curfew means total cessation of movement. Total cessation of movement, both vehicular and human movement. Wherever you are, once it is 8 o'clock, you remain there. Wherever you are, you remain where you are till 8 o'clock. From 8 to 8 p.m. in the evening till 6 a.m. in the morning. No movement. All business activities should cease by 3 p.m. 15:00 hours. So that before the curfew starts by 8 p.m., there is a window of 5 hours. And that was given because of the peculiar nature of Lagos, being the economic center of the country, which has transportation as part of its. Anything anybody is doing, when it's 8 o'clock, a person should go to his or her bed. You can remain in your house, lock your doors, and be watching your television, be staying with your family, but not on the street, not walking on the street. So walking on the street during the day is an offense. Walking on the street during the day is an offense without face mask. And walking on the streets after 8 p.m., either with or without face mask, is an offense. So now, members of the public, the basic idea behind this by the government is to make sure that we reduce the spread of this virus so that gradually it will leave the society to come back to a normality. But for those who refuse to comply with that directive, we shall continue to enforce it. And equally, interstate movement has been banned. Only those on essential services are allowed interstate, and that should be before 8 p.m. Once it's 8 p.m., there is total lockdown. That is curfew. No interstate movement, except for those on essential services, which have been enumerated by the federal government. But then interstate movements on that essential service too will cease by 8 o'clock. Either essential service or not, by 8 o'clock, interstate movement ceases. It's curfew. The interstate movement is allowed for essential services between 6 a.m. and 8 p.m. Once it's 8 p.m., interstate services cease. Interstate movement. So no cross-border of any state.
the Lagos State Commissioner of Police, Mr. Akim Odumusu. Meanwhile, in answer to a question by one of the journalists present at today's Presidential Task Force on COVID-19 briefing in Abuja, the task force once again unequivocally confirmed that journalists, along all other designated essential service workers, are exempted from the ban on movement during curfew by presidential directive. Journalists had repeatedly asked for clarification from the PTF on COVID-19 after what they described as continuous harassment by security agents. And on each occasion, the task force had repeated that journalists and other essential service workers are exempted from that ban on movement.
I think our guidelines are very clear. The restrictions on interstate travel does not apply to essential travel or essential services. And we have specifically excluded agriculture and agri-related activities. Law enforcement, as far as I know, belong to federal authorities, and we expect the guidelines that we have provided and the work we are doing with the security chiefs to be respected by these law enforcement agencies, where people are allowed free movement either because of the type or nature of the work they are doing. They should be allowed free movement across state borders.
To further confirm the PTF's position on the position of journalists and media in general, the PTF Chairman, who is also the Secretary to the Government of the Federation, Mr. Boss Mustafa, he expressed the federal government's deep gratitude to the media for the role it has played in efforts to contain the spread of COVID-19 in Nigeria.
In the coming days, intense consultations will be deepened with different segments of the society, including the state governments, security agencies, religious and community leaders, to ensure a coordinated implementation of the measures. As I mentioned yesterday, specific directives have been issued to security agencies to strictly enforce the measures. I therefore admonish Nigerians to please observe the restriction in full. I, however, wish to assure our essential workers, such as the frontline medical personnel, the media, the environmental health workers, farmers and agro-related service providers, oil and gas services, aviation, the power sector, and a host of others, that they will be adequately protected. Your obligation is to always carry a valid means of identification.
The Secretary to the Government of the Federation and Chairman of the PTF, Boss Mustafa. Let's go to our correspondent, Olu Phillips, who is somewhere in Lagos. Good evening, Olu. Where exactly are you reporting from this evening?
Yeah, Ladi, is it safe for me to actually tell you where we are right now? Because we are also under that controversial directive. I hope we are not in a state of confusion here in Lagos as regards the new directive. So I'm tucked in one of the streets in Lagos, in Ikeja, where hopefully if we can move according to the directive, we'll be able to do some walking from here for about 10-15 kilometers back to the office, or wherever we can be stopped. We'll pass the night there till 6 a.m. tomorrow. That's the implication of where we are, for instance, as you asked.
You have already reported in the run-up to this program that in the process of the enforcement, you have in fact witnessed the arrest of one journalist already who's breached this latest directive.
Well, I hope we can comfortably use the word breached, because the guy, the journalist in question, just ran into the roadblock somewhere around Ikeja, and the truth is he assumed that it's another day in the life of a journalist where you can go about to do your legitimate work. Beyond that, a medical doctor also has been arrested, and you know medical doctors, but gentlemen, they're always gentlemen, and the man said to me, well, I'm just going to go back to my hospital. And I asked him, what's the implication of that? He said, well, once it is 8 p.m., if I have a surgery, if someone is dying, if someone has been brought in for emergency, I will simply leave them and go away so that I don't get caught up in the curfew. This is the situation we are in, Laddie, and we are not called, for instance, the fourth estate of the realm for other reasons other than why, constitutional reasons for what we do and why we do what we do, Laddie.
Olu, I must ask you this. In all what you've been able to see tonight, also you've reported this evening that the trucks that are supposed to be moving from one state to the other, even those on essential duties, have also been stopped at the border points, and that they're already there in this new strict compliance with the new regulations.
Laddie, if you notice the way I have slowly talked to you this evening, it's deliberate so that we are not misunderstood. The truth is, we have had trucks carrying petroleum products, essential duties, petroleum products which are essential products, being stopped at the border control. What that means is that if there are over 400 of them, for instance, that flung Lagos to come and pick up petroleum products, of course, you know that most depots are in Lagos, and from here you transport to all other parts of the country. If about 300-400 of them that do that every day get stopped from this time till 6 a.m., you can imagine what shortfall we're going to be seeing in the nation in terms of fuel scarcity, as it were. We are also very careful not to say that we are saying there will be fuel scarcity. But the truth is, if you stop essential duty people from doing their job, the implications are as good as white and black. There's no middle point. I just do hope, like every other person in our category, do hope that this directive or this new information has not been given out misconstrued. I mean, I hope someone has not misconstrued a particular directive in this direction, because medical doctors are going to stay where they are. Those carrying fuel will stay where they are. Journalists will stay where they are. Essentially, once it is 8 o'clock, everything in Nigeria will be put on halt in the name of curfew.
Olu Phillips, thank you so much for your reporting, and I do sincerely hope you don't have to walk back here, or you don't get locked down wherever it is that you are in Lagos today. Our correspondent, Olu Phillips, reporting there. The 216 COVID-19 cases recorded within the last 24 hours were in 14 states and the Federal Capital Territory, as displayed on the website of the Nigeria Center for Disease Control, the NCDC. This brings the total number of confirmed cases to 6,175, of which 1,644 are discharged patients, 191 fatalities recorded, and 4,340 active cases. A breakdown of the figures by region shows that Lagos in the southwest still has the highest number of cases with 2,624, followed by Kano in the northwest with 842. In the north-central region, the Federal Capital Territory has the third highest number in the country with 422. Borno now tops in the northeast with 223 cases. Edo leads in the south-south with 108, and Enugu in the southeast has just 15 cases. Well, we are told that, as you heard from Olu there, quite a number of people have been caught unawares by this very latest development. One of them is our guest tonight, a consultant psychiatrist and clinical psychologist who has found himself locked down in the Ilupeju area of Lagos, and therefore he joins us via the phone. Dr. Peter Ogunobi, thank you so much for your time. Welcome to our program this evening.
Thank you so much for having me.
Let me begin, before we get to our topic for the day, let me begin by, how did this latest directive meet you, that no further movement, even for essential service workers, once the curfew is in effect?
Well, I've never seen such a thing before in my life. I'm visibly shaking as I'm talking to you now in my car. I finished my clinic and attended to the patient. And I was to see another patient in another hospital, a patient in critical care that needed my help. And I was accosted on the road. I met roadblocks. And of course, as usual, I identified myself. I showed my ID card. They saw a lot of things in my car to prove that, yes, this person is not just lying. But what I was told is, the officers came. One was telling me, what were you doing till 8 o'clock? Another one said, let me just tell you the truth. If you love yourself, stay at home with your family. We have been giving directives, total lockdown, including essential health workers. I said, I have an emergency to attend to. They said, you're speaking grammar. Let me tell you, go through this route, get this way, and go home. I said, this is your hospital, I'm going. I was told. And for more than 1 hour, I have been finding myself roaming from one street to the other, trying to find my route. I kept meeting different roadblocks, and nobody was allowed. I met other essential workers who told me the same price. Along Ikorodu Road, along Sabo Commercial Avenue, Murtala Mohammed Avenue, everywhere blocked. I don't know what is going on. I don't understand.
Well, at this point, maybe the question to ask is that, or the way to look at this is that the federal government had insisted that it was going to move to the phase of enforcement since people were not seen to be complying. Now, the question I would have asked you if you were here, being a psychiatrist and psychologist, is what makes people, in terms of behavior, resistant to rules? That would now lead to the kind of situation where others are affected by their non-compliance.
Well, yeah, as a behavioral scientist, I understand that sometimes the natural instinct of every man psychologically is to go towards deviance. And that is why there are rules, there are laws, and there are orders. Remove rules and laws, even the best of the Western world will be chaotic. Everything, you have a state of acrimony. People will naturally do things based on their selfish and their personal interest. And that is why we have laws and rules. It also goes to talk about the Maslow hierarchy of need, that the basic instinct of survival is the lowest before you talk about needs. And these two are very key to mankind. The first level, you talk about flight or fight, the biological needs and everything. So these two needs are what drive man or mankind to do things. And a man will rather do anything against the law to satisfy his selfish desire. And that is why you need rules and orders to make sure that you clamp down on some of these things. But it's quite unfortunate the way it is being done now.
Well, would you be in a position to make an appeal? Because now we're talking about essential service workers who will be needed for the situation that has led to what we're talking about, including people like yourself and others, such as journalists and other frontline health workers. What would you want the government to do now? Because they've moved to the phase of enforcement, and it appears as if it has created a different kind of problem, if you like.
Now, anywhere in the world, even where you have total lockdown, it has never been heard of in history that during total lockdown in any society that you prevent frontline workers, medical officers, nurses, pharmacists, because others will die. As you said, COVID, this is becoming something else. You are preventing death from COVID, you are preventing transmission, but there are people that are dying of other ailments. People have typhoid, people have malaria, people have hypertension, people have diabetes, people have septicemia, people have different ailments that we still need to attend to. I think a balanced approach is needed here. You do not stop essential health workers, you do not stop security outfits, you do not stop people. I saw lots of trucks, all stopped. So what do we have? We're going to have waste, which will not be removed. A law officer was harassed in front of me. Even when the man was shouting that I am allowed to move, and they said, no, it's a total lockdown. The truth is, an average health worker wants to also stay at home. An average health worker wants to stay with his family or her family. But the call of duty makes us to say, no, we just have to go out. And if you are clamping down everything totally, I don't see any reason I'm sorry in that. So a balanced approach. Show your eyes that those who are trying to lie or try to say, oh, they are this, they are that, they can be easily fished out. It is that simple. It is that, and that is how it is done anywhere in the world. Ours should not be different.
All right, thank you very much, Dr. Peter Ogunubi. My apologies that you are detained, as it were, or not arrested, but detained where you are. And one can only hope that you're able to make your way back home. Thank you for your time tonight, and do stay safe as you try to meander your way. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We'll take a break, and when we come back, we'll take a further look at this developing story, as well as update you on the original theme that we had for tonight. Please stay on with us. Thank you for staying tuned. Welcome back to our COVID-19 update. I've been joined in the studios by another frontline health worker, this time a consultant public health physician, Dr. Alera Roberts. Thank you, Dr. Roberts, even though I must say that since you are here, there might be some difficulty.
I'm not finding it funny at all, Nadia Akeredoluwale, because if you had told me this, I would have definitely not left my house. And
if we had known at that time, we would have.
No, but you see, the repercussions of this is that a lot of frontline workers, come 3 o'clock, will go home and sit there. What happens to patients in the hospital? Now, what is to happen to the lady who goes into labor tonight? Has the Commissioner of Police thought about that? There are very real repercussions to these unguarded statements when we are made, because there's no way the Commissioner of Police can make a statement that is in direct contravention to something that the chairman of the Presidential Task Force clearly said and you broadcast earlier this evening.
That leaves us with a begging question, which I asked Dr. Nubi earlier on, which is that we have now gotten to the situation where we have gone from substantial non-compliance to this situation, which means that even those who are allowed to move or who were allowed to move have now been told no movement. What impact do you think that will have on the original thing, which is the attempt or the containment efforts against COVID-19?
Ladi, we are well beyond containment. We have already said over and over again, we have absolute community transmission of the virus. This virus is out there. There's no putting it back in the bottle. That's just the truth of the matter. The more we test, the more cases we will find. What we need to do now is look at the medical care, the management of people who have the virus. If you're asymptomatic, we know what to do. If you're mildly symptomatic, we know what to do. If you're moderately symptomatic, we know what to do. But we only know what to do for as long as healthcare workers can get to the hospitals and do what is needed to be done. And then don't forget that we're talking about an entire health system. What happens to our cleaners? What happens to our environmental health officers? What happens to our nurses? No matter what a doctor says, if the nurses are not on ground, patients will die. We have to think of the totality of the situation. What happens when our generators have no diesel and you say tankers cannot lift or move? When do we want them to be supplying? In the middle of the day when we're all rushing about? I mean, there are consequences to this that need to be really, really seriously thought out. And I'd be very surprised if our state administration will allow this to stand, because he's well aware of the implications of this on the wider society. We need essential staff to work. We need essential staff to work. That's just it. What happens when, what happens, I mean, the thing that is really scaring me is that I know I have a young lady who is due. Supposing she goes, and you know babies have a habit of coming at night. When she goes into labor now, where do we find the midwives? How do we get her to hospital? Supposing she needs surgical intervention, so the anesthetist will be called out. How does he move? How do we predict that these things are going to happen so that they stay overnight? There are things that need to be, I mean, the implication of this is so scary. It really is very scary.
What is to be done now?
Thank God I'm not in a position to answer that question, Ladi. But those that know what to do, and they better start doing it quickly.
Okay, let me then ask you a more general question, which was our initial subject, even though it looks a bit overtaken by events now, but all the same, since you are here, I will ask. People have said that one of the things we could do to prevent this contagion is building up immunity systems. And one of the things that you can use to do this is your diet.
I don't pretend to be versed in that, but that is true. That is true. A strong immunity will definitely get you through this. And if you, like I had said, I think it was last week, as you come into contact with small amounts of the virus, your immunity kicks in and you build antibodies against it. And that's what we are talking about when we are talking about the development of the herd immunity. Diet, exercise, lifestyle are all critical to building a strong immunity. So part of it is that. And there are lots of things. I mean, if we were to start talking about diet, honestly, this session is a bit too short. We could go into all sorts of things. But yes, and of course, with that, we all hear the rumors. So what do we think of the ginger, lemon, garlic, whatever?
Indeed. That would be my next question,
yes,
actually.
There are proven health benefits to each and every one of those food substances. We've known that for generations. We've known that from biblical times. So it is true. You have a diet that is, strong on the antioxidants, fruits and vegetables, and the antioxidants that are contained in cloves and of garlic and turmeric and ginger, lime, and whatnot. Fantastic. Fantastic. And if you have a diet that is less on the added and refined sugars and processed foods, that's even very good as well. Plus, you must add to a good diet exercise, and certainly what is being touted now is that 20 minutes in the sun that helps build up your vitamin D levels has some beneficial. All this, we've known it all. However, they do not treat or cure or prevent COVID. They strengthen your immune system. And a strong immune system means that if your body comes into contact with anything, any virus, any germ, you're in a better position to fight back and overcome it. But it should not be taken as a cure or a treatment for a particular disease. No, that is not what we are saying.
Well, I guess there's just enough time for me to thank you, Dr. Roberts, for being our guest at this point. But while we're on that, let us update you on something else that happened today. The Minister of Interior, Rauf Aregbesola, says the Chinese medical team, which arrived in Nigeria on the 8th of April, are still in the country. Mr. Aregbesola, who was speaking today during the briefing of the Presidential Task Force on COVID-19, says although the team's visas have expired, they have been unable to return to China because of the restrictions placed on air travel.
Inquisitive and curious Nigerian journalist who will want to get into everything and expose everything is good for a democracy, and we thank you for it. Indeed, 15 Chinese nationals came into Nigeria on the 8th of April this year. And from everything we have heard and said, they were here on the bill of CCECC, a Chinese company working in Nigeria, doing some work for us in several places. And in conjunction with some Nigerian companies, agreed to support us in the effort to respond to the pandemic. They came on a 30-day visa issued in Beijing. They are still here. And I know I need to tell you why they are here. They are still here, not because they've not completed their job, but because there is a restriction on travels in Nigeria occasioned by the protocol of COVID-19.
Okay, so that is that. We have a background report on this issue of diet, which I was just talking to Dr. Roberts. Our Abuja correspondent, Caleb Magua, put together a report which takes a look at this issue of diet and the possibility that this could provide some key to some sort of effort towards taking a handle on COVID-19. I understand that report isn't ready at this point. Let me introduce Dr. Cynthia Onyekwere, who is a dietitian and a nutritionist. Thank you very much for being our guest. Dr. Onyekwere is a registered dietitian as well as a nutritionist. At this point, let me begin by asking you, why is an adequate diet necessary in prevention and management of COVID-19?
There are about 8 food groups in all. You have the cereals and the grains group. In this category, you have food like rice. You have the legumes group, where you have food like beans, soya beans. You have vegetable group, fruit group, milk group, then meat and poultry. So, a diet that comprises of these various food groups. And they contain
I'm very sorry to interrupt, Mr. Ekwere. I understand that we're having some problems with your audio. Will work to rectify those, but in the meantime, let me come back to Dr. Roberts. Now, Dr. Roberts, before we took the dietitian and nutritionist, the last question I asked you, you ended with the statement that even this has been known. It was part of what you said, that this has been known since biblical times. Why haven't we been complying since biblical times?
Actually, we have the perfect experts in the studio to be able to answer that. And I can assure you, a large proportion of people do comply, and naturally, because you must confess, I mean, speaking purely from a housewife's point of view, food that is seasoned with some of these things is a lot tastier than food that is cooked without these seasonings. But people do, most and generally, do add these things to their meals. And we find that in our part of the world, we do tend to eat what we call close to the ground. So we do have a lot of natural foods, items in our diet naturally. You know, when you think of our local dishes and whatnot, we find that we have what we call one ingredient items, you know, which means that we don't eat a lot of over-processed foods and foods that have a lot of chemicals and additives put in. So I think we do have an advantage over the Western world in that regard.
I wonder now if I can then say that going forward, a lot of people don't have this information. They eat what is available and what is probably affordable, more importantly. should they now be more conscious, as it were, given the era in which we are? Should they now be more conscious? I know a lot of people who go, for example, for food supplements. They don't even bother with looking for food now. They look for the supplements, things that talk very much about vitamins and other such sophisticated pieces that should be in the body system. So I'm told. Aha. So should more people be looking in that direction?
As in the direction, do you want me
of the supplements, yes.
Laddie,
I will still come back. I will still
you
come. I will
ask me
still
a
come to
very
the
hard
expert.
question, because what you're asking me literally is to take the food out of the mouths of our compatriots in the drug and supplement industry. But definitely, one thing I will say, and I will always continue to say, is natural over artificial. I will always go that route. So if you can have it natural, by all means have it natural. In some cases, you will require some drug supplementation. But I think that it should be more the exception than the norm.
Than the rule. Well, we'll take a break at this point. When we return from that break, I hope we can then get to speak to the actual expert that
Absolutely.
Dr. Roberts was talking about, the dietitian and nutritionist I introduced earlier, Mrs. Cynthia Oyekwere. That will be, of course, after this break. We will go to her and definitely get an expert view on this issue. Please stay on with us. Thanks for staying tuned. We were taking a look at the role of diet and nutrition in the prevention and management of COVID-19. And earlier, I introduced a registered dietitian, nutritionist, a member of the Association of Nigerian Dietitians, Cynthia Oyekwere. I understand that we fixed what was wrong with her audio now and that we can take her. Cynthia, you were talking about, I did ask how important the issue of diet is in the prevention and management of COVID-19. Unfortunately, we couldn't hear any of your answers, so maybe you will have better luck this time.
Okay, an adequate diet helps to strengthen the immune system, because as we know, the immune system is a network of cells, tissues, and organs that help to defend the body against infections and diseases. So this system needs nutrients, macronutrients, and then the micronutrients. The macronutrients are the energy-giving nutrients, such as carbohydrates, fats, and proteins. Then the micronutrients are vitamins, such as vitamins A, B, C, D, and E, and then minerals such as zinc, copper, and selenium. Now, no single food contains all these nutrients. However, for one to obtain these nutrients, you'd have to consume an adequate diet. Now, an adequate diet is simply a diet that contains all these nutrients in the right quantity and quality. To achieve this, you'd have to select foods from the various food groups to ensure that you have an adequate diet. There are about 8 food groups. These food groups include cereals and grains group. You have food like rice, bread, pasta, and all that there. You also have the legumes and nuts group. You have beans, soybeans, granules, and all that. You also have vegetable group, which includes green leafy vegetables such as ewedu, spinach, pumpkin, and all that. So you have the fruit group and then water, as well as meat, fish, and poultry group. So if you pick foods from these different food groups, you'll be able to get an adequate diet that will strengthen your immune system to function well.
There are those who will say that many of the things that you're mentioning, there are people who know about this, but they will say, look, how many people can really afford many of these things? That what you find is that many people end up eating what is affordable, not what is recommended. So how many of the things that are, really local and probably cheaper would you recommend in this regard? How can low-income households maintain consumption while still taking an adequate diet?
Okay, I'd like to say, first of all, that eating healthy doesn't really mean eating expensive. Amongst all these food groups I've mentioned, in each group, you'd have the very expensive foods, and then you have the cheap food. For instance, amongst the meat, fish, and poultry group, you have chicken, you have turkey, which is a little bit expensive, but you also have the edible insects there. You have crayfish, you have egg, which is more cheaper. So it's not really about the cost. I think it's about the knowledge. Some people don't just know what to do. And for the few that know, they are not ready to implement what they're supposed to do. So for instance, if you go on Instagram and social media, there are a lot of people there who are self-acclaimed nutritionists, giving a lot of false information to people. And then many Nigerians have become so gullible. They tend to believe what they hear, even when those information are very misleading and wrong. So it's not as if some don't, yes, there are those who probably don't know what to do, but it's not about the cost. You can still plan an adequate diet within the limits of your budget.
The isolation centers where people are being treated for this and where the cases are being managed, are there dietitians or nutritionists, to your knowledge, in those centers as team members who also have their input in the management of the cases there in terms of the diet of the foods that those who have COVID-19 are consuming as part of the get well process?
Well, to the best of my knowledge, the involvement of registered dietitian nutritionists in the various isolation centers have been very minimal. And it's really very important for dietitians to be part of the team because we're talking about strengthening the immune system. So the dietitians need to plan an adequate menu that would meet the nutritional requirements of these patients so they can get what they need to strengthen their immune system. Of course, you know, there are also other factors that come in when managing COVID-19 patients. There are some who would have underlying non-communicable diseases. So dietitians need to be part, for instance, diabetic patients. When you're managing a diabetic patient, dietary standard protocols need to be applied. So dietitians need to be part of the teams to prevent these patients from coming down with the complications that may arise as a result of the COVID-19. And then there are also cases whereby patients may not be conscious enough to feed orally. It's necessary for a dietitian to be there to determine the next appropriate route of feeding for that patient, and as well plan something that will be appropriate enough to go through whichever route you want to decide to feed that patient. So far, I would say the involvement has been minimal, but it can actually be better.
Well, at this point, let me say thank you to you, Cynthia Yekwere, for that. A lot of people, as you say, some people might have that information, but a lot of those who have it are not using it, and more importantly, those who claim to have it are not necessarily those who have the correct information. That distinction is very important. I want to thank you for coming on the program this evening and to wish you safe journey back home, if that is going to be possible this evening, in view of the earlier report that we've had about the issue of movement during curfew. In that same vein, let me thank Dr. Roberts for staying with us. There'll be those who argue that not really with a choice. But thank you for being our guest tonight. It's always a pleasure to have you.
Thank you for having me.
Now, just before we go, in the United States, there is a vaccine that is showing a promise. And this is happening just as we cross the 1.5 million mark of those infected with COVID-19 in that country. Our correspondent, Maria Bird, has a report.
New great hope for the U.S. as the Moderna vaccine has passed the first human trial.
We received 2 doses of our vaccine in the first 2 dose level cohorts. That's at 25 microgram low dose and 100 microgram our mid dose. Had seroconverted to develop antibodies in their blood. Altogether, we're very pleased by that result because it suggests we're on the right path. And so we'll be looking across 600 people in the phase 2 study, which will start any day now. And that will be to both confirm that we've got the right idea of the dose, where we believe we're going to see protective immunity, as well as that the safety profile continues to hold up.
As the reopening of the United States has started in a phased approach, many Americans are hopeful that a vaccine will help to save lives and allow Americans to get back together again.
So having a potential vaccine that will help eliminate those tensions, those fears of getting back to spending time with our family and friends in a social capacity would be amazing. And the simple fact of those in our communities that have so many preconditions and underlying conditions that are more susceptible to having this virus, that vaccine will give us all the more confidence and ease those fears of being able to be sociable again and not to negatively impact the health of our family and our loved ones.
Moderna's vaccine helped create immune responses that might help protect people from being infected with the novel coronavirus. Plans are underway to start additional trials immediately in hopes its vaccine could be ready for emergency use this fall. From Washington, Maria Bird, Channels Television News.
One can only wish them the best of luck with that and hope that it does turn out to live up to its promise. That's our COVID-19 update tonight. Thanks for being with us. Of course, you can get more information about COVID-19 and all the stats from both the WHO website and the NCDC website. And of course, channelstv.com has updates on the situation in all parts of Nigeria and beyond. My name is Ladi Akari Doluale. Good night.